Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Marvin Vettori of Fights That Make You Snory. Jack Slack, it's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following UFC Apex 1 billion. Roman Dolidze versus Marvin Vettori 2. This time it's 5 rounds. Did we need it? You tell me. The great minds at the UFC were too busy asking, could we do Roman Dolidze versus Marvin Vettori 2, rather than should we do Roman Dolidze versus Marvin Vettori 2. Yeah, this one was... it was action. There was stuff happening all the time, but it was just the same sequence playing out over and over again. Roman Dolidze throws an overhand right, and when I say overhand right, I mean like wide swinging right. Didn't even dip his head offline most times. And then Vettori would either eat it and counter, or occasionally pull and counter, or eat it and not counter. And as he got tired later on, that was the one that played out the most. It was so frustrating because these guys both have good teams. Marvin Vettori has ATT, he's got Mike Brown in his corner. Roman Dolidze has Eric Nixick in his corner. They have experienced coaches who know what they're doing and will have seen all the habits in the other guy, and yet neither guy seemed to change at all between the fights, except one got washed. Nothing they did seemed to change all that much. Roman Dolidze still threw maybe 3 straight right hands in the entire fight. Wrestling largely a non-factor. I mean, Roman Dolidze is slow. There's no way around that. On the feet, Roman Dolidze is slow. The one instance of him knocking out someone with his hands, they uploaded this on the UFC social media the other day, and they managed to do a very clever mobile phone crop where they managed to crop out Phil Hawes limping on his completely destroyed right leg. Because that's all. I mean, it was Phil Hawes who has no chin, and he was just standing right in front of Dolidze because Dolidze had just ACL'd him doing some K-guard stuff. Most of the time, Roman Dolidze is painfully slow on the feet. He throws nice hard kicks that sometimes hit people's forearms, but most of the time, if the guy can move, like Imavov, he looks dreadful. Even Vettori made him look very sloppy and bad in the first fight, but Vettori just seems to not have anything left. And you know, there's the underlying problem with Vettori that he's a massive, scary-looking middleweight who can't hit. He doesn't have any power. He has one finish in his entire UFC run, and despite being billed as a kickboxer, a lot of the things that he does are just sort of grindy takedowns. He had Steve Mocco in his corner as well, actually. So yeah, this was an ugly fight. It went 5 rounds. Marvin Vettori looked progressively more not there, and Roman Dolidze won by decision. I would be excited for Roman Dolidze, but there's still, I mean, all that stuff that's still there is like, oh, throw the overhand and then I'll throw the back fist with the same hand instead of just combination punching or, moving in between my shots. I did like the occasional spinning back elbow he threw. I like a southpaw versus orthodox matchup spinning back elbow. You don't see as many of those as same stance matchup back elbows. But they can work real nice if the other guy's leading with his rear hand, throwing the big left straight as Vettori was over and over again. This whole fight just reeked of like not having enough ideas, both for the guy who was running away with it and the guy who didn't even get into it after the first round. But yeah, do I think Dolidze's going anywhere? I saw him against Imavov, and the moment that he couldn't get the guy down and he was losing the striking, he just collapsed mentally and started hugging the entire time. Didn't even knee him along the fence. He just held him along the fence. And that is not encouraging. So let's do the good stuff now, because there were some finishes on this, and finishes are not automatically good. I'm not the UFC intern on Twitter saying, 9 finishes at the Apex. Tell us Apex cards are boring. Finishes mean whatever you want them to mean. If you don't know anything about fighting and you see a load of people get knocked out, that's probably great. The unfortunate burden of watching a few fights is that you realise knockouts over nobodies are not impressive. Luckily, there were some good ones on here. Chidi and Jokwani versus Zaleski. This was an interesting fight because Zaleski sometimes looks like a world beater. And sometimes he looks like, despite being a striker, he looks like he doesn't understand the rudiments of striking. So his fight against the Leech a few years back, it just suddenly appeared that Zaleski didn't know anything about boxing or footwork, and he was just sort of following around the cage getting beaten up. And this one, Zaleski got stuck on the end of the front kicks, and he was never able to adapt. Chidi Njokuani, I'm really enjoying his little career renaissance. I don't think he's ever going to be a world champion, But at any given time, there are only 8 male world champions in MMA, unless you start counting smaller organizations. But you can't let that put you off enjoying fights, and you can't let that distract you from stuff that's effective. There are effective techniques and tactics used by fighters who don't get to the absolute highest levels that you can't just write off. Like, Chidi Njokuani is doing brilliant work, really brilliant work with his clinch striking. And nobody in MMA uses clinch striking enough anyway, but no one is using it in the same way as him. And if you transposed that skill onto someone else, I mean, I was talking about Justin Gaethje in the clinch last week, but transpose that skill onto anyone else, it's a useful skill. Transpose it onto someone who's really good at forcing takedowns and the clinch and actually wants to be in prolonged clinches and finds themselves there all the time. And you've got a really dangerous fighter coming together. So Njokuani was poking him with these long front kicks. Zaleski did at one point manage to come in with a right straight to the body, left hook upstairs, right hook, right overhand, and he stunned him with that one. But he was having a hellish time getting in. Really struggling to stick to the kicks or parry the kicks. Chidi was doing a good job of coming up to the face with the teep, turning the kick over occasionally so that he couldn't just reach for it. And when Zaleski did manage to grab a hold of it, he managed to pull him into the clinch, hit him with an elbow, threatened to elbow him. Another thing from Muay Thai that you don't see enough in MMA is that in Muay Thai, because you are expecting your kick to get caught, the downside of having your kick caught is not as high. You get thrown to the mat, the other guy goes, ooh, and certainly his corner do, and then you get up, and then you get back to fighting. You've lost a few seconds of the fight in the eyes of the judges and the fans. In MMA, obviously, that can be the whole round on the bottom or the fight over if you get strangled. But if you come out with the expectation that the guy might catch your kick and you do it so that he's out on the end of your leg, and you use the fact that he's going to have to drape his arm over your leg to catch it, you can use that to land elbows really nicely. Nongo is fantastic at this. Same did a few of these in a couple of his fights in one championship recently. You throw the kicks enough that the other guy catches a kick, and where that would be like, oh no, disaster, it's not my turn anymore, Same's like, your hands down, here's an elbow, mate. Slices the guy open. And Njokuani was doing that a little bit when Zaleski's trying to stick to his kicks and sort of largely failing. Njokuani's such an interesting guy because he's Anthony Njokuani's brother. And Anthony Njokuani was a little bit of a star back in WEC, World Elite Cage Fighting, which the UFC bought in, I think it was 2009. They had basically everything below lightweight the WEC ran. And the UFC bought them and kept them going for a while as like a separate brand, and then absorbed those lower divisions and just gave the title holders UFC belts. So people like, Dominic Cruz wasn't the champion there, was he? But Jose Aldo got a UFC belt. His UFC title run doesn't actually include his WEC title run, which was effectively a UFC title run because it was still owned by the UFC and all the best featherweights were there. But anyway, Anthony Njokuani was a really fun fighter in the WEC days. Chidi's his brother. And one of the interesting things about the two of them is that in this fight, Bisping and whoever else was on commentary were talking about how he's very traditional Thai style there. And I can see that he's upright, he's square on, he's throwing lots of straight kicks, using the teep wonderfully. And then he does his elbows and his knees in the clinch. If you wanted to see, if you want to show someone Muay Thai and MMA, you can show them Khalil Roundtree doing his light lead leg in that one fight, or you can show them Chidi beating people up in the clinch. But both the Njokuanis come from long pants kickboxing originally, which is really funny. Like Stephen Thompson. I think they both fought in whatever Chuck Norris's gay long pants league was called. Not saying they don't have Muay Thai experience, but it's funny. Anyone who does long pants kickboxing, they get sort of weird skills in there. It's like Andrew Tate is always in the news, and there's always some people on Twitter arguing over whether he was legit or not. But if you watch his fights, it's got a very weird style because he comes from long pants kickboxing, so he's not very used to low kicks, but he is used to picking up high kicks just from where his foot is and stuff. It makes for a very weird style. And all the early American kickboxers come from long pants kickboxing. So Zaleski closed in on him in round 2, and Chidi just grabbed the head, threw a couple of knees, managed to hit him on the way out, right under the chin with a knee, knocked him down, finished with the TKO. And I think this puts Chidi on a 4-fight winning streak. Oh, no, a 3-fight winning streak. Oh, and he missed weight for this one. Forget everything positive I said. But even in that fight, he lost to Alexijuk. He was doing the same, beating him up in the clinch. And honestly, this is an aspect of the game that I'd love to see more people consider, particularly like, as in the main event, we had Roman Dolidze just throw the same overhand 100 times. Kevin Vallejos, who we all were impressed by and loved, I was talking about it on the Boycast, saying his Contender Series opponent came out and just threw the jab every single time they stepped in, which means if Vallejos is trying to time the overhand across the top, the cross counter as it's called, he's going to find that every single time because there's nothing confusing him about when to go. It's just whenever you are stepping forwards. You've got to throw some feints out there. You've got to do some other stuff. You've got to be prepared for him to throw it and try and take advantage of that. And one of the ways you can take advantage of a guy throwing overhands constantly is you jam your lead hand out as if to throw a jab, but you throw it, say, a foot off to your left so that your elbow goes into his elbow. Makes it very hard for him to land the overhand with any stank, and then you can grab his head off that and start kneeing him. Oh, that's another thing I love about Chidi. He'll do that inside low kick, which is another thing you could do with this. If you throw your left hand out straight like that, you make a little leverage guard, so your elbow is inside their elbow, making it hard for them to land. You land the inside low kick at the same time when he's throwing the overhand, he's going to fall over. Chidi does that all the time. Man, I should just do a Filthy Casuals guide to Chidi and Jaquani for 2,000 views on YouTube, because I love this dude's style. He's showing so many little things that any other MMA fighter could take and use without the limiting factor of not having very good grappling. But yeah, more people need to be addressing these overhands and pulling people in and starting and striking from there. You know, even if you just get a collar tie and you throw an elbow straight to it. These are the things that we should be stealing from Muay Thai. Instead of coming out, bouncing light on the lead foot and then trying to run up into a low kick. Anything else on here? Alexander Hernandez fight. I don't need to talk about that. Damon Blackshear versus Cody Gibson. I thought this would be a good one, and it actually was. Cody Gibson's got a lot of that Corey Sandhagen in him. The stance switching and the volume, and that throwing the rear hand straight, stepping through and jabbing with the same hand again, and then continuing the combination from there. He was doing that a lot, going up and down the body. Really liked what he was doing. And for a little while, Blackshear, as Chris Eubank would say, was like a rag in the breeze. And then he managed to pull himself back into it, got on top in round 2, and he hit he was working for this Kimura for a long time from side control. It's interesting to watch. Anyone who's really good at the Kimura is interesting to watch because they get on top of side control and they almost want you to dig the underhook, the classical MMA escape, because they're going to sit their weight down on it. They're going to get their hands through and they're going to start working for the Kimura. One of the massively underlooked techniques of Islam Makhachev, he's very, very good with the Kimura. And Aliskerov, who is from the same camp, trained with Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov, and no one is really talking about him because he lost his first UFC fight. Kind of like Ankalaev. People are just going to forget about him for a year or two now. But he's very good with the Kimura, particularly from the top. But the Kimura is an unusual submission to land in MMA because the submission itself is not that common generally, even in high-level grappling. Finishing a Kimura means that the other guy's done something wrong because you've got his arm away from his body and behind his back. More often you'll see people use the Kimura grip, and that's, as Ryan Hall would say, a gun to their head. It's you can't unlock your hands, so I'm going to move around you while you've got your hands locked. But Blackshear was able to get the hand to the mat and start cranking this Kimura before Cody Gibson could even get his hands locked. I think Cody Gibson ended up trying to lock his hands across Blackshear's back, which of course is never going to keep your hands together that long. And then there's the Kimura in the light heavyweight fight with DR Nergaze, who people like fraud checked. I don't know if it is fraud checking anymore. People are just not very good in getting into the UFC. But there's so many of them, it's not like you defrauded your way in here. It's just that we're hiring people who aren't very good nowadays. But Nergaze has a tick, a Tourette's tick, which I've seen in plenty of fighters. Amir Khan, not the British boxer, the guy from One Championship, MMA fighter, he has a very severe one where he turns his head away, which you would think is very bad for fighting. And it does hamper him a bit, but he's managed to succeed in spite of that. A lot of boxers develop touching their eyebrows with their knuckles into a tick. So that's quite interesting. But Nergazay has a tick where he like rubs his right eye with his left hand. So his hand goes all the way across his head. You know, if it was just that he needed to touch his eye and he did it with his right hand, his right eye, that would be a lot safer. But his left hand comes all the way across his head. I think he's a southpaw too. So if someone just stands in front of him and times the high kick when he twitches, dude's dead. Because how many times have you seen guys kick through that hand even? If the hand is not there in a strong barrier, the whole forearm ready to take something, you aren't going to absorb the high kick. And if the hand starts coming across the head and you throw the high kick, man, I mean, that's what Krokop did. He made people reach for his left straight so that when his high kick came, they were already reaching slightly and they just had no chance of obstructing the powerful, powerful high kick that was coming through afterwards. But this fight was so silly. Ribeiro beat him up for the whole first round. Nergazay comes out and dives in for a takedown in the second round. And he went, oh, nice. Okay, now we're working. He's going to start doing something. And he got Kimura'd from bottom half, which is insane. The Kimura from bottom half, like I said, positionally, can be very useful. You can use it to get your top knee to clear out your bottom leg and come up in a turtle. I know Dean Thomas teaches that one to his fighters. And Matt Linden did it to Rampage. Sakuraba used to do it all the time. You can insert a butterfly hook. You can start stepping over and trying to go for a sort of Choi Bari armbar. Roger Gracie does a really cool hip bump sweep from there. You've got options because you've locked the guy's hands down. Very rare that the guy lets you pull his arm out and put it behind his back. That's a massive failure on his part, to be honest. Especially when you've got the guy smushed into the fence too. You can just walk your knees up into him and crowd him. He's not going to sweep you overhead with a butterfly hook or anything like that. So he gets his arm up his back and then he has to roll because that is the mechanism of sweeping from there. You've got their arm up their back. If you keep pushing it, it's going to tear their shoulder. So they roll. And Bisping goes, oh, he's lost it. Just as this dude rolls into the bottom of being submitted by a Kimura. Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I was not at all impressed with DR Nergazay, and I came in going, oh, an undefeated guy from Kazakhstan. I wonder if he trains with Shavkat, which I suppose is what everyone was supposed to do here. I think he was a huge favourite too. I suppose everyone did the same thing. If he does train with Shavkat, then he is Shavkat's light heavyweight punching bag. It's like I used to know a guy who sparred with Ricky Hatton. But he's basically, when Ricky Hatton, who's famously got massively out of shape between fights, when Ricky was having a fat day, they just bring this guy in and let Ricky get some self-esteem building rounds in. Kevin Vallejos looked good against Sungwoo Choi, but Sungwoo Choi is now on like a 1-4 run. He was supposed to get blown out of the water here, and he did. Again, timing right hands across the top, really lovely stuff. Inside slips to left hooks. I talked about this dude on the Boycast a good amount. I imagine if he continues what he's doing, I'll get to talk about him. Hopefully, I'll get to talk about him a lot more in future. Anyone, though, who is entering like that, using their hands in rapid combination, this is what people want to see. They want to see like a little Mike Tyson. And this dude is so short for the weight class that he has to be able to do this. He has to be able to draw out the jab, enter with the overhand across the top, the cross counter, or slip inside and come back with the left hook. And we talked extensively about Tyson's sort of dipping jab, where he went side on into a sort of horse stance on the Boycast. But these are the ways you get in as a shorter guy. I do think his job will be a lot more complicated. Again, this is what I was saying. He's throwing the overhand constantly in answer to everything you do. If you throw your arm out so that the crook of your elbow goes into the crook of his elbow, and then you grab his head and start kneeing, or you just throw the knee up at the same time, he's dipping his head every single time. If he meets better strikers who are better at selecting the correct weapons, there's a reason that guys aren't just boxing constantly in Muay Thai contests. There's too many things that can cut you off. Knees, the clinch, high kicks when you dip your head, elbows. Waldo Cortez Acosta versus Ryan Spann. Wouldn't you know it, Ryan Spann's career reinvention at heavyweight was not him redevoting himself to his craft and lifting more weights but staying a professional, and I'm going to go up to heavyweight and show these big boys that athletes have gas tanks and stuff. No, it was an excuse to just get fat and gas out almost immediately against an actual heavyweight whose gas tank isn't great in itself, but man, desperate shit. There's a moment in this fight, I was going to clip it and put it on Twitter because it was fantastic, but I thought, oh, they'll nuke my account if I do that. They both enter and they fake at each other, and then they both pull their heads back, and Acosta throws an overhand hammer fist like a baseball pitch, just going to break your own shoulder if it lands, misses, and Ryan Spann does a wheel kick that completely misses and sends him running across the ring. Just a terrible fight. But, we've only got 29 heavyweights in the world now, and 2 of them are Ryan Spann and Kennedy and Nzechukwu. Just light heavyweights who decided to stop cutting. This fight made me want to cut. Oh, anything else? Carlos Vera versus Musasa. I remembered Carlos Vera from his fight with Rinya Nakai. He lost, but a decision over 3 rounds. And he was interesting in his sort of like rolls from the turtle and his attempts to entangle legs. And then I look over and who's in his corner? It's the boy Ryan Hall. So I remembered him from them being quite interesting. And this one, apparently he was no one bet on him winning by submission. And he knocked this guy down. Beautiful open stance, lean outside. We were talking about hand fighting and getting outside the lead shoulder a lot in the Pereira versus Ankalaev preview, and then it happened in the fight. But occupy the lead hand, throw the overhand, get your head offline. Guy did a big duck towards the punching side. Vera follows it with a high kick, and he leans right into it. Last year, was it last year or the year before? Must have been the year before, because it was Leon Edwards, Julian Arosa, Alex Caceres. All these guys were landing this head kick that was 1-2 high kick. You throw your right straight or your left straight, whatever your rear hand is. You throw your straight, the opponent either parries it or slips it, and they're there naked for the high kick immediately afterwards. And I remember so many people were saying to me, that's the breakout technique of the year. That's the breakout technique of the year. It had a moment, but it's been around for ages. People have been doing that in kickboxing forever. But it still works. Like if a guy, most of the good reactions to having a right straight thrown at you, if you try and do something clever, all of them open you up to being kicked in the head on that side. So it's a really powerful little combination. And then he followed it up with a rear naked choke, which was lovely. Big fan of Carlos Vera. He's a boy. Andre Lima looked great. Daniel Barez looked... he had a rough outing this time because he didn't get out of first gear, and Andre Lima just beat him up for basically... how long did this fight go? It was a 13-minute fight, and I think Daniel Barez got beaten up for about 12:45. He started out trying to do some stuff, and Lima hit him with some jabs and some low kicks, and really put him on the back foot. And then Barez just never got off it, and it was all Lima style on him. Lovely elbows in this fight, both holding elbows and as in like in a sort of long clinch where you've got an arm behind their head. You're holding them and you're elbowing them. And also elbows in boxing combinations when the guy's moving his head and you just throw the elbow with no attachments to him. Both lovely. Lima was also doing something that I really... Who was it? Anantasak, the Nakmoy, legendary Nakmoy from, I think, the 90s. Great boxer. Brilliant with his elbows, though. And he used to throw the 1-2. He'd trick guys into checking his kicks. Then he'd jump in with a 1-2, hit him on the chin with his left hand. He was a southpaw. And then he'd pull back with his lead hand, elbow up, just towards them. So if they swung back on him, he had a good shield there, but they also might just lunge head first onto his elbow. And that worked a surprising amount. He did an episode of the Muay Thai Library with Sylvie, where he explained that he throws his elbow really with the point of the elbow, not because snicker snack cut, blah, 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 but because a lot of the time you will end up hitting their forearms. And he said if you hit their forearms with the point of your elbow, you've got a good chance of numbing their forearm altogether. And Antasak, he's my boy. He's also the reason that I want to see more teeping to the thigh, generally. And then there were two women's MMA finishes to start the card. Very weird. Carly Giudice, she had like the Lady Andre Lima performance on this card because Eunice Duben did not get anything going. She just was on the back foot the entire time, occasionally like winged her hands, but nowhere close. And Giudice threw a little question mark kick in the early going and came very close. And he went, oh, that's not good. And then she threw up the high kick later on. I think it was Southpaw versus Orthodox, so open side high kick, and knocked this lass out, which was surprising. And then Priscilla Cachoeira, the dirtiest fighter in the UFC and also a bit of a bum. They brought her in to fight Shevchenko when she was 8-0. And if you actually watched the fights, you knew she was going to get murked. This was back when Shevchenko wasn't as big as she is, but you knew she was going to get murked because she's just like swinging straight arms and then pulling straight back and getting hit on the chin anyway. But man, Josiane Nunes, that first knockout, she came into the UFC, she knocked out Alas with an overhand left, and everyone went, oh my God, it's Lady Tyson. We've got her. This is the one. And she's just looked awful since then. In this fight, she's there basically like looking at the floor, holding her hands on her head like she's going, oh no, every time that Priscilla Cachoeira comes at her. And she's just like teeing herself up to get uppercutted. Priscilla Cachoeira did this to Shayna Dobson. She uppercutted her as she changed level in about 40 seconds. But that was relatively fortunate. I mean, maybe she read something in it, but that's not a lot of time to get reads. This one, every time she threw something at Nunes went, oh no, and put her head straight in the path of the uppercut, looking down. And finally, Cachoeira just lets it go, slumps her. And now we all have to put up with another 3 Priscilla Cachoeira fights. If you're losing to Priscilla Cachoeira, you are officially the worst fighter in the UFC and you need to be cut immediately. For those of you who don't remember, Gillian Robertson got on her back, started choking her, and Priscilla Cachoeira reached up and felt where her face was and then put her thumb in her eye and tried to gouge her. Robertson pulled her head back and then started choking again, and she did it again. And the referee was like, oh? Now, granted, the referee can't... If you DQ her, Robertson loses her chance at submission of the night or whatever. It was basically sealed at that point. But the UFC should have fucking cut her, because they cut Palhares for holding heel hooks too long and endangering fighters unnecessarily. If you are willing to if you're willing to physically gouge someone on the mat, not even with like the ambiguity of a striking exchange to hide it in, sorry, you're a dick and you should be cut. Now that card was pretty dire, so I asked the Patreon boys to give me some questions for today, and I'll do some of those. Lewis says, outside of heavyweight, what is the weakest men's division in the UFC right now? I've been having a good think about lightweight. I mean, it's not the weakest division in the UFC right now, but I've been thinking about it because it's so top-heavy. It's these old guys aging out in the top of the division, and not a whole lot of guys coming up. And featherweight was also like that for quite a while. You know, you still got Brian Ortega fighting once every 3 years and somehow being top 7 or whatever. But it's probably... we shit on middleweights a lot, but the reason that they can do so many Apex main events with middleweights is that there's a lot of decent middleweights about, as in decent within the middleweight division. Light heavyweight is pretty much a mess. Ankalaev we all knew was good, even if you thought he was going to lose to Pereira, we knew he was pretty good. Jan Blachowicz is good, but very old now and really rapidly aging out. Özdemir is decent, but again, completely washed at this point. Ulberg's on the way up. He's probably the most sort of promising guy out of the new guys, I would say. He's fighting Jan. Is it next week or the week after? So there's a good chance he loses that, and then we're completely out of new talent. And you got to remember that like Glover Teixeira was not the top dog in his prime. Not even in his prime. He came to the UFC quite late because he had visa issues. But when he turned up in the UFC, he was not the top dog. There were guys better than him. Johnson, Gustafsson. Didn't he even lose to Corey Anderson? But everyone left, and Glover Teixeira won the belt by easily double-legging Jan Blachowicz. Glover Teixeira didn't learn any new tricks. He's always had the same, 3 moves. Timing the overhand across the top of people's jabs, the single leg and the double leg. That was about it. And the arm triangle from the top of the mount, or knocking people out from the top of the mount. But he's not a very technically varied fighter. He didn't learn anything new. He just hung around and was tough as hell. That's how bad that division got. And it's pretty bad now. You know, Alex Pereira winning the belt in 2 fights or whatever it was, and not looking out of place doing that, tells you something. So I think it's, heavyweight and light heavyweight, easily the worst men's divisions. Flyweight has sort of the same problems that heavyweight does, in that less of the male population is that size. There are freaks who are convinced that all flyweight is super technical, blah, blah, blah. There have been some truly shocking flyweights made it into the UFC. For every Joshua Van, you also get like 2 Shannon Rosses or Jesus Aguilars and or Lacerda. It's another division that suffers from there not being enough people. That it's just, in some divisions, it's like if you're in the UFC, you're a pretty shit hot fighter. And in other divisions, it's like, well, he's not a very shit hot fighter, but this is the state of the division right now. And we've got to take what we're given. Lee says, what's your pros and cons for each fighting organisation? Big love from a Scottish Thai boxer. UFC, they've got all the fighters. There's your pro. Cons, they're trying less and less. I mean, if you saw the news this week, the pay-per-view buys are allegedly in the toilet. They don't have any stars because they've tried their hardest to not have any stars. But now they're finding that that's actually hurting them. And they're going, oh no, we don't have any stars. They're going to try and get the Netflix deal so that they just are paid to churn out events every week. And it doesn't matter that they're bad. And it's maddening because there are guys who aren't getting enough fights in. There are enough good fighters that you could have interesting stuff on every card. And it also feels like they don't care about advertising either. It's just like, some stuff is going on at the Apex this week. Or it might not be, but it probably is. You know, they got their Twitter intern on there bragging about how there were 9 finishes on this card, even though everyone said Apex events are boring. It's like, people want to watch live events. There are people like me who just watch fights to study fights and enjoy fighting and stuff. And they will watch it in the aftermath. 95% of people who want to watch sports are not going to watch sports after they've been on. And that's true of fights too. You know, if the rare occurrence is like, if something happened late at night in the UK and no one really paid attention, and then the next morning, I remember people going, Jack, you've got to watch Joe Calzaghe. He absolutely battered Jeff Lacey. I've never seen anything like it. And then you'd go and try and find it on YouTube or whatever, in the early days of YouTube. But generally, people want to watch fights live. Telling them that the fights that they didn't think were good enough to watch live were actually good doesn't help you in any way. You get the one shot to make them care about it before the fights, and you fucked that up. And the more bad events they see, the less inclined they are to just watch for the sake of watching. One Championship, great presentation. Really love their production values. I love when they have title fights and they have the belt on a plinth by the cage, spotlit, so that you get that amazing shot of the 2 fighters fighting and the belt in the background. Cons, they're shady as fuck. They're conflicts of interest all over the place. 2 of their biggest fighters were Matt Hume's boys, and he was also head of rules and regs. They threaten their fighters quite a lot with legal action that they then can't follow through on, and they don't offer their fighters fights anymore. Zhong Jingnan turned up after 3 years on the sidelines this week to fight in MMA. Didn't defend her belt, though, apparently. So it's falling apart, that place. You know, you never see Chatri anywhere anymore. There was the big push. He was on Rogan. He'd turn up on Ariel. And now he's not anywhere. You get the sense that, like, the noose is tightening from the investors. But 4-ounce Muay Thai? If the UFC genuinely doesn't have enough good stuff to stock cards, do you know how many good kickboxers and Nak Muay there are in, like, don't even care about the ties. Let one championship have all the ties. Do you know how many good kickboxers there are in the US and Europe who can't get enough fights and will fight for almost nothing? It would be so easy to add that to a UFC card. And people would fucking love it. There are like 10 people in the world who would cry about adding 4-ounce Muay Thai or stand and bang, whatever you want to call it, to UFC cards. And they're dorks and we should ignore them. Rising, again, presentation's beautiful. You know, the only downside is you're watching fights in the ring, but I consider it like a special event, so I don't care that much. It is annoying watching people fall through all the time. And the other downside is that, like, they don't have that many good fighters. KSW finds good fighters and then puts them on the undercards of, like, roidy bodybuilder versus roidy rapper. I don't know what is going on with KSW. Octagon apparently fills stadiums, but doesn't come through to the fighters. They're still, like, paid like it's a regional show, and also no one knows who any of their fighters are. And PFL, I mean, I even forgot to mention them, even though they're supposed to be the number 2. Well, there's certainly one kind of number 2, but they had a budget of, I don't know, $20 million and $10. They bought Bellator for $20 million, and then they realized that they've got to run 2 promotions worth of fighters for $10. So they bought this company and immediately can't do anything. It's insane. Rory says, what are the most important boxing principles lacking in MMA currently? Does slipping and rolling invoke too much risk of knees and kicks? No, I don't think it does, unless you see someone who's trying to knee you in the head, and then you start being a bit more judicious with when you do that. But when there are trade-offs to everything. If someone is trying to stand there and knee you as you dip, they're more vulnerable to other techniques. You can dip and then knee tap them over while they're on one leg. You can do all sorts of, you can dip and try and cut kick them. There's all sorts of other stuff you can do. You can dip, hope they get on one leg, and then just jump in upright punching them. There's so many other things that you can do when you see someone is trying to counter you in a certain way. But I would say ringcraft is generally not good, both offensive and defensive. Position in the cage, it cuts off so many of the opponent's options when you take good cage position, and it gives you more options like back kicks and things. Guys are trying those out in the open all day. They want a highlight reel knockout, and it's like, just push the guy towards the cage, and 50% of the time he will run onto your back kick because he has to circle one way or the other. That and touching the body, just scoring points to the body. Body jabs and right straights to the body are not big body rips, but they do quickly take it out of people. I talked about Ajit Kabayel the other day, the heavyweight who's just come up out of nowhere, stopped 3 guys in a row with body shots. One of them he dropped him with a body jab, and the guy couldn't fight on because he just keeps poking you in the body, and it adds up. And at some point, you're going to get caught breathing in. And just getting out there and scoring points to the body is so important, because that's not only does it get some points on the board for you offense-wise in the eyes of the judges, it makes you more comfortable going for them, and it makes the opponent either more aware of them so that you can start bombing him over the top with overhands, or he might try and ignore them and you can start putting more stank on the body shots. Sam says, any judo throws you think are underutilized in MMA? All judo throws. No, anything off the whizzer, anything that can be used off the whizzer is underused in MMA. And should be used more, but you're seeing more and more guys go for it. Ryan Spann face-planted himself trying to do a wizard throw off the cage, but then that just made me repost the old clip of Ngannou doing it to Cyril Gane. If you get pushed against the cage and you can attempt a wizard throw, best case scenario, you throw them on their back. Brilliant. Worst case scenario, you make them sprawl out and sort of face-plant, and you get off the cage. I'm a big fan, sort of offensively cage work and offensively clinch work, of the Mongolian pickup. I don't know if it has a name in judo yet. They sometimes call it like an inside uchimata, but it's where you pull the guy towards you and you lift him on your thigh between his legs. You know, you put his inner thigh, or bollocks if you're not very good at it, on your thigh, and you lift him up by lifting your knee up, and you turn him around in the air. And the Mongols have been, is it Mongols? Is Mongols correct? The Mongolians have been doing that in all combat sports, basically. If you go and watch sumo, guys are doing it in sumo because the Mongolians run sumo. But if you go and watch some bok, they do that, but they hold on to the pants and stuff doing it. I mean, this second positive reference to Aliskerov in the UFC, even though he's got one fight in the UFC and he lost it, but he's very good at it. Makhachev's done it off the cage too, in the UFC. It's just a dope-looking throw, but I think it lacks some of the effortless cool of judo. It's genuinely, you are picking a dude up. Like there's no way around that. Callum says, if you were a fighter, what would your walkout song be? Something to hype you up or something silly to relieve the tension? You could do a dope-ass walkout to Ain't No Grave, but I think I'd spook myself doing that. What are some bangers that I've never heard? Oh, Werewolves of London. Get that going. Have the whole crowd chanting along to that. Any song that people could chant along to, instant hit. If I were a British fighter in the UFC, I'd be entering to Hey Jude. Makes no sense in that context, but people love a good sing-along. Jermaine Stewart, We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off. Na 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 na. Willie the Pimp would be a rockin' entrance. Do you know what was really cool? When Hulk Hogan, or Hollywood Hogan as he was at the time, used to enter to Voodoo Child slight return, Jimi Hendrix. And they never paid for the rights for live shows, so they would dub over the NWO music, but live he would enter to Voodoo Child, and that was apparently awesome. That's just an awesome song to enter to. Or I would do my Filthy Casuals thing and I'd just enter to the Attention by Charlie Puth. Looped bass for 10 hours. Ryan says, best way to train striking, feel like pad work and partner drills can sometimes be fairly useless. I think pad work and partner drills are... I'm very interested in sort of reaction stuff now. This is something that even F1 drivers and so on do. Reaction times are something that's like always decaying as an adult, but very useful to work on and try and hinder them decaying. Pad drills can be used in all kinds of ways. I was talking the other week about Kenny Weldon's ring cutting pad drill, how he'd walk around either to the left or the right of his fighter, hold the pad out in the direction that he was moving, and they'd have to pivot and throw the punch from that side, which teaches the really good habits of, well, firstly, pivoting to face someone as they're circling around you, but also the really good habit of cutting a guy off with a nice herding strike, getting him to stand still and then hitting him with 3 more or whatever. So if you've got specific drills you're doing with pads, I think that can be very useful. And that's, it's all about working on things that you need to work on. So that's something probably coaches need to recognize in you. And any sort of sparring that is not sparring is quite good. One of the great strengths of like BJJ, judo, wrestling, I mean, wrestling's a bit harder on the body because they just go for it, but they found ways of doing resistant training where you're working against someone else's reactions and attacks and defenses without getting completely mullered all the time. Very hard to do that in sports where, even light contact in like, if you're throwing punches at 40% or something like that, and you're dinging each other a lot, it's going to build up and do some damage to your brain. But any sort of body sparring, footworky sort of sparring, anything where you can work moving around a live opponent and so on, or just put on some shin guards and kicks only. Obviously, no heavy kicks to the head, but that is all. I mean, that's part of why the Thais are so brilliant in Muay Thai. They just do loads of laid back, very controlled sparring where they're feeling for openings, checking kicks and so on. And in most of the old gyms, they don't use shin pads. They just control their kicks. Mr. Ozushi says, what is the cool new stuff in grappling right now, gi and no gi? Oh, I don't actually... Is there anything interesting tearing up the meta right now? I guess the new thing is that we're all waiting for Craig Jones Invitational 2, which apparently is going to be a team event. Don't think he's set a date for it yet, but he did announce that he's got some teams. Can't wait to do some stuff about that. A Name says, are there strikes you wish were used more in MMA? I need to see more rolling left hooks to the body. I presume he means like weaving. Right hands to the left side in closed stance matchups, and question mark kicks that start low like a leg kick would. I mean, that's a tricky one to get good at in a convincing way. We're still seeing guys who adopt front kicks to the body with the ball of the foot are having incredible success. If you're not doing that already, you should be. And so many guys are not doing it that I feel comfortable saying that they should be doing it. It was my breakout technique of the year in 2013, and it's still underutilized. I'd love to see more kicking of the back leg, Yosa kicks. Probably the only example we've seen in the UFC of someone regularly doing it. Benson Henderson did it a few times against Donald Cerrone in their sort of sparring match, their third fight. But Sadiq Youssef, boy of the podcast, he turned up against Edson Barboza and he lost that fight ultimately. But one of the things that was really surprising was how hard it was for Edson Barboza to get low kicks off, because he was constantly having his back leg kicked. He was getting front kicked with the ball of the foot into the front of his quad on his back leg, or the inside of his quad if his foot was turned out. But it tears people up in a way that they don't expect. I mean, that's why Yuki Yosa's had so much success with it. And as soon as he started having success, everyone started stealing it. And then he went to train in the Netherlands, and Netherlands sparring sessions are legendary. There are clips of Myrtle Groenhart beating the shit out of like 14-year-old kids in the gym. But they apparently banned him from doing the Yosa kick because he was hurting so many guys with it. Anything else I'd like to see? I joked about standing hammer fist, Waldo, whatever his name was, earlier. But if you watch Zhong Jingnan, she had a 4-ounce boxing match. I really want to do something about like weird rule sets that were only for 1 or 2 fights, but showed us something interesting that could be stolen. So Josh Barnett's bare-knuckle boxing match where the clinch was allowed, that was a really good one. But Zhong Jingnan had this 4-ounce boxing match. That's how desperate one were to find her something to do. But she fights a decent Nagmoy, what's her name, Wonder Girl. And she's getting in close, and she throws this hammer fist chopping down from right to left downwards over her opponent's lead shoulder. So she just keeps like hammer fisting her on the chin. It was really interesting to watch. But body jabs, I think body jabs should be adopted by everyone. And generally more clinch striking. I would love more clinch striking everywhere. But mainly in the clinch. George says, oi, oi, Jack, when's the next history episode coming out? I've sort of stalled production on a couple of things on those. Things keep happening, and I keep having to write about them instead or podcast about them. But I will have something history coming again soon. Angus says, excited for Morgan Charrier versus Nathaniel Wood. Any thoughts? Though you'll probably talk about it in the preview anyway. It jumps out as a really good fight on that card. I said that on Twitter, and obviously dorks turn up and go, neither of them will ever be champion. It's like, you are missing 70% of the fun of fighting, you colossal dork. It's just an interesting stylistic matchup between two striking-based fighters who also... Charrier's decent counter-wrestling. Nathaniel Wood, decent offensive wrestling because he has those interesting trips from the clinch. His little outside reap thing that's very similar to what Yuki Yosa does in kickboxing, where he just sort of backheels the opponent's leg. I'll talk more about the matchup because I'm going to watch some of their fights this week to refresh my memory, and also just to look for some habits that the other could exploit. But I really do think that could be a fun fight. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. I've filled up some time there with some questions. I'll do some more on the Boycast because I got loads came in again. The Slacky Patreon, amazing community. They're always just full of interesting questions about people. I've got one here about Steve Morris, old British karate guy turned doorman turned MMA coach. All sorts of weird stuff that the Patreon boys bring through. If you want to get in on the Boycast and extra stuff, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to read what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Apexing my way to Netflix, bless.